Hello and welcome to Global Lens. Over the next 30 minutes, we put the spotlight on all the top stories from around the world. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are the top global stories we are tracking. President Trump says US will start sending letters to countries specifying what tariff rates will be imposed starting today. Floats potential tariffs in a wide range of 10% to 70%. No official word yet on a possible mini trade deal between India and the US as the 9th of July deadline looms.
कि भारत कभी कोई ट्रेड डील डेडलाइन या समय सीमा के आधार पर कभी नहीं करता है.
As India's trade delegation returns from the US, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says India never negotiates trade deals with a deadline. Sources say differences remain over agriculture and dairy, but yet officials are hopeful of a mini deal being inked. Separately, India tells World Trade Organization it wants to retaliate against US tariffs on automobile imports levied in March this year. SEBI bars American trading firm Jane Street from Indian capital markets, alleging market manipulation. Interim order seeking to impound gains of more than 4,800 crore rupees, the largest asset seizure by SEBI to date. Jane Street disputes the findings and says it will engage with the regulator. Markets across Asia ended mostly lower ahead of US President Donald Trump's tariff deadline, while Japan's Nikkei and China's Shanghai ended with marginal gains. The Korean Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng saw deep cuts. India bucked the trend, with the Nifty and Sensex seeing a last-hour recovery to end Friday with marginal gains. It was a sea of red across Europe, with the French CAC and German DAX seeing cuts of nearly 0.5%. The British FTSE also managed to eke out some gains. Remember, Wall Street is shut on account of US's Independence Day. US President Donald Trump has announced that his administration will start sending the tariff letters to countries starting today. The letters will inform these countries what tariff rates they will face. Speaking to reporters before boarding Air Force One, Trump said these countries will be expected to start paying tariffs from the 1st of August, and the tariffs will range in value from 10% to 70%. He also added that negotiating individual trade deals with over 170 countries is a complex process. This comes at a time where India and the US are inching closer to sign a mini trade deal next week.
So we're going to start sending letters out to various countries starting tomorrow. We'll probably have 10 or 12 go out tomorrow. And over the next few days, I think by the 9th, they'll be fully covered. And they'll range in value from maybe 60 or 70% tariffs to 10 and 20% tariffs. But they're going to be starting to go out sometime tomorrow. We've done the final form, and it's basically going to explain what the countries are going to be paying in tariffs.
India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has reiterated that India would not be pressured into signing a trade deal. The development comes as India's negotiating team returns from Washington after holding discussions on an interim trade deal. Sources say while agriculture and auto still remain key sectors of contention, a mini trade deal is still expected before the 9th of July reciprocal tariff deadline. Separately, India has also told the World Trade Organization that it would retaliate against the US tariffs on automobile imports levied in March this year. Remember, the US had imposed a 25% ad valorem tariff on import of auto parts and passenger vehicles from India in March.
National interests will always be supreme. वो ध्यान में रखते हुए अच्छा अगर डील बनती है तो भारत तो विकसित देशों के साथ डील करने के लिए कभी भी तैयार है. भारत कभी कोई ट्रेड डील डेडलाइन या समय सीमा के आधार पर कभी नहीं करता है. जब डील अच्छी बन जाए, पूरी तरीके से पक जाए और देश हित में हो, तब उसको हम स्वीकार करते हैं. अभी तो कोई प्लान नहीं है. अब तो जल्दी पार्लियामेंट सेशन आने वाला है.
To discuss this, we are now joined by former Foreign Secretary Kaval Cibil and former Indian Ambassador to the United States, Meera Shankar. Thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Sibal, if I can begin with you. You've got Piyush Goyal now saying, and this is just a few days ahead of the 9 July deadline, that India never negotiates trade deals with a deadline in mind, but with national interest in mind. What does this mean? Are we close to a deal or not yet?
It could mean two things. One is that there is some trouble ahead and we are not hopeful that we'll be able to sign a deal. The other is a general statement to the effect that we don't buckle under pressure and we don't abide by timelines drawn by others in order to say that we will not accept anything but a win-win deal. This is to reassure the public that India will not be conceding certain will not be making certain fundamental concessions which are against our interests, as, for example, on agriculture and dairy products. So you can interpret it both ways. On the one hand, it's a diplomatic statement saying that whatever is announced as an interim deal will be a win-win situation and India will not be yielding on its basic interests. Or it could mean that America is standing very firm with regard to dairy and agriculture and what have you. And I know that they are being very, very difficult and demanding and pressing. So it could also mean that at the last minute, some jockeying is taking place in terms of tussle of wills as to who bends first.
Right, that's an important point. Let me also go across to Ambassador Meera, Shankar. Ambassador Meera, Shankar, what we're picking up, and you and Ambassador Sibal are familiar with so many of these negotiations in the past. We're getting to know from sources that we are close, but we're not there yet. There are differences on agriculture, there are differences on automobiles, which are yet to be resolved. Our chief negotiator is back in Delhi. Piyush Goyal has said he's not going back anytime soon. What does this really indicate about the state of things right now?
Well, it indicates perhaps that while both countries are keen to reach that sweet spot where they think that the deal is acceptable to both sides, they perhaps haven't reached it yet, and that the US is playing hardball, as they tend to do in trade negotiations. And India, which initially signaled a rather overeager attitude by giving unilateral concessions, has toughened its stance under US pressure to indicate that there are certain no-go areas, such as agriculture and dairy, where the social and political and economic costs for India will be not commensurate with the benefits that we will get, and will be very, very difficult for us because our agriculture, subsistence, farming, 2.5-acre farms, they can't compete with the huge, multinational corporations in the US. And since 50% of our population is self-employed in agriculture, then it's a sector which we can't really, open to vulnerability in a way which would create turmoil or lead to losses in this sector. So we are signaling our resolve. We've signaled that we are willing to do a deal and looking forward to having one which benefits both countries. That, I don't think, is the way that Trump is looking at the negotiations at present. He's been basically saying, I'm holding out this stick of tariffs, reciprocal tariffs. Now, if you open up, I won't use the stick. But then what is the benefit that we get, in terms of any additional access to the US market, or even preferential access to the US market, even if tariffs are put? So I think these are questions which actually can't be rushed. Normally, trade deals take a long time because there are always winners and losers, and each side wants to see that they can maximize their gains while having losses which they can live with. And that takes time. See, so as a result, the US's negotiations with neither the EU, nor Japan, nor Mexico, nor Canada, nor Vietnam have at the moment fructified, because these can't be rushed. No country will walk blindly into a trade deal which will not be seen as beneficial to it.
That's an important point. Let me go across to Ambassador Sibal. Ambassador Sibal, what we've also seen now that today at the WTO, India has proposed imposing retaliatory tariffs on select US products in response to Washington safeguard duties on automobile imports from India. Now, US had imposed a 25% ad valorem tariff on imports of passenger vehicles, light trucks, and also certain automobile parts. Why do you think India has chosen to do this at the juncture when we could be close to a deal?
Well, actually, this suggests a hardening of posture on our side. In effect, Trump's approach is that of a bully. He's hung this sword of democracies on the head of everyone by announcing July 9 as a liberation day for tariffs and forcing countries to bend to his will. And he continues to threaten, as I heard just now, that he's going to send out letters, 15 or 20 tomorrow and more later. So, at a certain point, you have then to stand up for your basic and fundamental interests, and you cannot sacrifice your future because Trump has this approach of forcing you to concede to his irrational demands. He's converting the tariff issue into the central issue of U.S. foreign policy, far ahead of geopolitics and the relationship with India, which has tremendous potential in so many areas. He's willing to sacrifice that and create serious misunderstanding. Now, to come back to what you asked, in other circumstances, Trump has been threatening countries that who go to the WTO to file such complaints, that he will retaliate against them even more. He takes this as a kind of a personal challenge to him. The fact that we have decided to do so means that we are willing to call his bluff and are willing to protect our interests and send a signal that we are hardening our position and that we'll not entirely bend to his will. The fact is that from the statements that one has been hearing from Besant as well as from Lutnick, the American demands on us with regard to the market opening and tariffs is very harsh and very unacceptable from many points of view. And they keep on hammering away at it. And Lutnick, in his address to the ICNA dialogue, actually said that India has to open up its agriculture. I mean, it's a demand which America will not resile from, irrespective of all the very good arguments that we have, that we cannot open our agriculture sector. And Meera Shankar has just outlined what those concerns are. So let's see what happens on July 9. The fact of the matter is that whatever he does, that 10% tariff will remain. He has also imposed that 10% tariff on the UK despite this interim deal. But last point is this, that what we are looking at not as an FTA, because that will take a long time. And we've asked ourselves whether this is an interim deal and that, we will sign something when Trump comes in October for the Quad summit, by which time we'll have a bigger deal. But it will not be an FTA as such with the United States. No, it will be a trade facilitation agreement of sorts, if you like.
Right. That's an important point, sir. Let me go back to Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ambassador Meera Shankar, do you feel that there is also a lesson now for India? We gave several unilateral concessions starting from the union budget by lowering tariffs on motorcycles and imported cars. We did away with the major Google tax as well. It seems that there is no acknowledgement from the United States for all those goodwill gestures that we made.
Well, I think you don't negotiate with the US on the basis of goodwill. It has to be hard bargaining and quid pro quo, and you dot the I's and cross the T's. Anything given unilaterally is pocketed. You think you'll get goodwill on the basis of it, it's pocketed and the goalpost is moved. So it's not, it's not something that you really should do while negotiating with the US, because they are very hard-headed about trade negotiations and very lawyerly and legal. So, you have to say, if, we open up this, you give us this, and you finalize the deal. And then it's, as I said, the I's have to be dotted and the T's crossed.
Right. Let me also ask you, Ambassador Sibal, about one important development that has taken place through the day, and that is with reference to Jane Street, a US-based company which has now been barred by the Securities and Exchange Board of India, India's market regulator, from trading in Indian markets. They've been called out for a fraud, and the SEBI, the regulator, wants to recover 4,800 crores from them. Now, this is a very strong investigation, a strong order against a US-based company. How do you think this could be seen at a time when we're negotiating a deal?
I think those who are behind this, Jane, whatever it is, will try and reach the White House, will knock on their doors and see if Trump can be, agitated on this issue, because he takes these things very personally. That just ahead of the deal, they're trying to twist our arms through this, our regulator, and impose. He was extremely angry with I think Britain or the European Union. Yes, one of these countries which imposed a digital tax on US firms, and Trump threatened all kinds of things in retaliation. So I think the fact is that I don't think the government could have told the SEBI not to do this at this point in time and wait for a few more days, or at least after July 9, to do this. But I suppose SEBI had very good reason to do that, and they have done it. And indirectly, it can go both ways. One, it can show that we are resolved to deal with US firms if they are violating our regulations, and that we're not going to be deterred by American threats against that. On the other hand, in terms of what Trump's temperament is and the manner he deals with these things, maybe it would have been advisable to have delayed it. But then I suppose there is no coordination on these matters between the government of India and SEBI.
Right. And the market regulator, of course, functions independently. And this must have been a fraud that they must be investigating for quite a bit of time, possibly a year or so. Thank you so much, Ambassador Sibal and Ambassador Meera Shankar, for joining us. It's always a pleasure having you here on Global Lens on CNBC TV 18. Moving on, China slams the US-Vietnam trading pact, warning it won't accept any deal that comes at its expense, and vows resolute countermeasures, with several countries rushing to secure agreements with Washington ahead of the July 9 deadline. What this growing US-China power tussle could mean for India, I discuss all of this with Christopher Beddor of Gavekal Dragonomics on the other side. Welcome back. For the first time, the Indian Army has directly pointed to China's role in aiding Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. The Deputy Chief of Army Staff revealed that China provided real-time intelligence and live vectors to Pakistan during its operation with India. He acknowledged the growing Pakistan-China military nexus, stating that India now faces two adversaries on one front, with Pakistan at the forefront and China offering full-spectrum effort. He further added that China had effectively turned Pakistan into a test bed for its weapon systems.
So few lessons that I thought I must flag as far as Operation Sindoor is concerned. Firstly, one border, two adversaries. So we saw Pakistan one side, but adversaries were two, and if I would say actually four or three actually. So Pakistan was the front face. We had China providing all possible support, and it's no surprise, because if you were to look at statistics, in the last 5 years, 81% of the military hardware that Pakistan is getting is all Chinese, 81% of that.
It's not just on the battlefield. Tensions also persist on the business front. China has restricted the export of rare earth magnets to all nations. However, an exception has been made for US and European firms. Requests from the Indian companies have not been addressed yet. China has also restricted the export of specialty fertilizers to India. Chinese technicians have also exited the Apple supply chain and electronics manufacturing in India. Joining us now to discuss this further, Christopher Beddor, Deputy Director, China Research at Gavekal Dragonomics. Christopher, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Let me begin by asking you about the superpower competition between the US and China and how much of these economic sanctions that China is now imposing on the rest of the world is because of these trade tensions with the US.
Yeah, so that's really a question that's on the mind of a lot of folks, especially in Europe and other capitals around the world. And the answer is, in part, it is due to that. So in particular, what we've seen is that because of the US-China trade conflict, China has taken to weaponizing supply chains for rare earths in particular. They've imposed more export controls, which means that you need licenses to export some rare earth and rare earth magnets. And that's really being felt not just in the United States, but around the world. And in fact, some of the heaviest blows seem to have landed in countries that are not the United States. So I do think that you see some of Beijing's actions that they're taking in response to the United States are actually directed towards other countries.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the kind of tensions that we're seeing with India. Do you think China will further try to tighten the screws as far as the supply chains with India go? First, they stopped rare earth magnets, then specialty fertilizers. They're now pulling out Chinese workers from Foxconn plants in India. Why do you think China is doing this?
It's a great question. So I think that the issue here is that in Beijing's eyes, India is separate from many other countries, especially in Southeast Asia. So what I mean by that is Beijing has its eye on the likes of Vietnam and the likes of Cambodia, Malaysia, and so forth, in part because China wants to continue transshipments of goods from China through these countries to the United States in order to sidestep US tariffs. That calculus is really different when it comes to India. To be blunt, someplace like Cambodia or Vietnam is not going to become a manufacturing powerhouse to really rival China. But that is not true for India. India conceivably could, especially over a long period of time. So what you see is that Beijing's approach to India is quite different from other countries, where it is much more cognizant of the fact that places like Foxconn could take technology, it could take individuals from China, bring them over and build up India's manufacturing base, and that could potentially pose a long-term threat to China's manufacturing prowess.
All right. I would also like to ask you that after Vietnam, if US were to have an interim or mini trade deal with India, which is now looking quite likely, Trump has also said that there may be a deal with India very soon. Do you think that could worsen India's relations with China economically?
In the short term, I would say it probably wouldn't have a major impact. The reason being is that there's a lot of countries, again, Vietnam is sort of the archetypal example, where China is deeply invested in what trade deal they have with the United States because of transshipping. It wants to keep at least some transshipment going. And more broadly, it looks after Chinese companies that have invested a lot in these jurisdictions. But that's not quite true with India. India is not a major transshipment hub for Chinese goods flowing to the United States. So in the immediate term, it might not lead to this massive impact. I think that the concern would be in the longer term, that if the trade, the dust settles on the trade disputes and we get several deals coming through, and it looks like after some period of time that the Trump administration has really gone hard on China, but it's sort of pulled its punches on India because it views India as a potential bulwark against China in the long term. That could sow a lot more friction between China and India. I don't think we're there yet, but that is something that to keep an eye on in the horizon.
Right. What do you think is going to be the larger impact of the current geopolitical tensions? I'd like to just draw your attention to what the India Deputy Chief of Army Staff said today. For the first time, he clearly outlined the support that Pakistan got from China. He literally said that during Operation Sindoor, China was providing live operational updates, live vectors, intelligence to Pakistan, how almost 60 to 70% of their weaponry is coming from China, how they're getting weaponry from Turkey as well. And Pakistan has literally become a testing laboratory of Chinese weapons. Looking at the kind of weapons and the kind of support that China gave to Pakistan in the current conflict and clandestinely, what is the larger economic worry for India and the challenges that India should be ready for?
Yeah, I think that there's clearly a challenge here over the long term between geopolitically between India and China. That's not, of course, new. It's been going on for several years. And I think that it's reasonable to think that it will just intensify, especially as India increases economically. And, to be honest, that the United States has sort of always seen India as a potential a potential bulwark against China and tries to draw closer to it. So this is something that's really been on the mind of Beijing policymakers for, basically 2 decades at this point, but especially after in Trump's first administration, especially after the Quad was assembled, especially after the border disputes with India. It's really something that's kind of become more prominent over the years. And there's just no reason to think that these tensions are going to subside in the long term. In any given month or any given year, the needle might it might tick down in terms of the tensions. It might ease a little bit, but over the long term, it's really hard to see how there's sort of this very stable equilibrium. Again, especially with the United States looking to sort of shore up its alliances. And occasionally take action in conjunction with allies against China.
Right. As someone who is a very close China watcher, Christopher, how do you think China is going to strengthen itself because of the kind of restrictions and challenges that the United States is posing right now? Also, their attempts to diversify away from China. Do you think China could take more steps in order to restrict companies from moving out? Impose more restrictions on items such as rare earth magnets, semiconductors, specialty fertilizers in order to hurt global supply chains?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely it could. It definitely, one of its most powerful cards that it has to play is rare earths. And so we've of course already seen action on that to restrict rare earth supplies to the rest of the world. And that is that's proven a very potent weapon. It's inflicted a lot of damage, or at least threatened to inflict a lot of damage on countries around the world. So it's reasonable to think that if, say, trade negotiations, obviously there's currently a ceasefire between China and the United States, if that were to break down, if negotiations go sideways, very reasonable to think that China could turn back to that. The issue with rare earths is that it's sort of a very potent short-term weapon that diminishes over time, simply because by using it, you catalyze other countries to attempt to pool their resources to get supply chains out of China. So it's really, it's something that works incredibly well, maybe for a year or two. But then if you really want to lean on that tool, it might stop working after 5-10 years, something like that. Not to say that getting from point A to point B for other countries is going to be easy, but they will look to do that. And then, more broadly, I think that China is concerned about some degree of technology flowing from its borders, from its manufacturing facilities to other countries. So not just India, but we've seen in other areas, most notably the electronic vehicle space, that China has taken actions as other countries have looked to encourage Chinese firms to set up production. So not exporting the car from China to the domestic market, wherever that might be, but actually getting the likes of BYD and other companies to set up production facilities. China has grown skittish about how much of that technology is flowing abroad and whether that might pose some sort of threat to its manufacturing base at home. So I think these are all very serious concerns, and it's reasonable to think that China will take more actions in that space in the future.
All right. Thank you, Christopher, for joining us on the program. That's all we have for tonight's Global Lens. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.